Welcome to LSC. It's Sports Time. I'm your host, Bob Hintz. Today I have Steve Forbes with me, a former state wrestling champion at Bethel High School. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Bob.
Glad to have you here. We were going back. Wrestling wasn't what you did at the beginning.
No, absolutely not. In fact, I didn't start until the 10th grade in high school, which is a little unusual because we had some folks over in Norfolk called Granby School of Wrestling. Those kids have been doing it since they could walk.
Right. But you played a lot of baseball, and you told me one of your coaches blew my mind, Buddy Denton.
Buddy Denton was my junior high school baseball coach at Davis. Yes, played baseball growing up, played football until I was too small to play anymore.
You weren't the scat back.
No, well, I was when I was little. But after about 12 or 13, the guys got too big.
Okay. Now, when you were playing baseball, you played with a lot of different people. We had Henry Morgan in here. You mentioned that you played with Henry.
Henry and I played on the same Colt League team. It was called the Yankees years ago.
Right.
They were in Northampton, and I think Henry was a year older than I was.
Okay. Now, when you finally decided to take up wrestling, what was the thing that kind of got you interested in wrestling?
Well, I was running out of other sports to play. I wasn't big enough to play football anymore, and Jack Storts, who played football at Bethel, and another kid, his name was Brett Taylor, had wrestled the year before for the Hampton Crabber JV team, and they talked me into it, so just kind of went from there.
Okay. But now Jack ended up playing at Bethel. So when you say he was wrestling over at Hampton, that was Bethel didn't have a wrestling team, or was that before Bethel opened?
Bethel wasn't a school.
Okay.
We were at Davis, and as a ninth grader, he'd gone over to Hampton and started with the JV program over there.
Right, okay. And then as you got into wrestling, you being little, you got to take the lowest weight, which is not, they don't even have that weight anymore.
That's, as far as I know, that's correct. They do and they don't. Back then, they used to raise the weights as you went through the year. So by the end of the year, that weight was where the lowest weight is now, I think. Okay,
because we're talking 98 pounds, and it's 103 now.
Right, which is exactly what it would be at the end of the year back in those days.
Talk a little bit about how you kept your weight, because you still had to make sure you got the right nourishments and the nutrients.
I was fortunate, I think, in the sense that my mother was trying to lose some weight at the same time. So she put me on the same diet she was on for the most part. And I think my caloric intake was about 900 calories for that year. And I ate actually reasonably well. 3 small meals a day, or sometimes 2, but always breakfast and always dinner, kind of thing.
And talk about your mother. Your mother's working with you today in your office. I got to get a chance to see her every now and then when I go over there.
Yeah, we can't put her to rest. She's always got her hand in something.
That's kind of neat. So you go through the wrestling, and you find out you're pretty good with it. Your coach is...
Coach's name was Tony Katzius.
Tony, they called him the Jaw when I was there. I remember because he had a huge jaw.
That's right. And he always had a lot of good spirit. I don't know that Tony had a lot of wrestling background, but he always had a good spirit about him.
But he would bring in people, which would help you, and that's important. If you don't know what you're doing, you get some people in there that know.
Hugely helpful. I remember Eddie Barefoot, who was an official at the time, used to come in and work with me specifically some, and there'd be guys floating through Fort Eustis and other places that had done some wrestling in college, and they'd come by and help us out, and Tony was always real good about letting other people in the room.
Well, that's good. Talk about some of your teammates. Who was on the team with you?
The older guys when I first started was a guy named Ronnie Spicer that was very good, and Jack Storts, and Jack went on and wrestled at East Carolina at the same time I was wrestling at William & Mary. Those were the guys that come immediately to mind. Right,
and Jack went to my alma mater down in East Carolina. I knew I liked him for some reason. But all right, you graduated and you went to William & Mary. Now, did you go scholarship? Was on a wrestling scholarship, or you just went on a academic?
More of a combination of academics and just financial need for the most part. Right. I was fortunate enough to win a state championship. Jack was fortunate enough to come in second, so we felt like for a new school we'd done fairly well for the school. Right. And we were in different weights, so we never competed against each other per se, but I got to wrestle with him a lot after I grew a little bit more in the summers, and thoroughly enjoyed that too.
Well, let's talk a little bit about going through the state tournament, because we're talking about you wrestled more than 1 match a day, isn't that correct?
Well, typically you'd have about 4 matches, yes.
During that day?
Right. Well, it might be 3 that day, and then the finals maybe the next day kind of thing. Yeah, I beat a kid from Maury in the finals. I'd been beaten in the regional finals by a kid from Granby. And I'll never forget it. You know, Granby was quite prominent back then.
Right,
They'd won
yeah.
20 out of 21 state championships. And their coach, who just died a couple of years ago, his name was Martin, Billy Martin. He had a bunch of sons that had done well. In fact, my senior year, his middle boy, David, won his 4th state championship. But after the regional finals, and I'd gotten beaten by a kid from Granby, and I had no difficulty taking him down, but he had done the old Granby roll on me.
Yep.
and scored a bunch of points, and he beat me. I had decided in my own mind I was going to take him down and let him up. And old man Martin got word back over, believe it or not, that Forbes kid was the best kid on top he thought he'd ever seen. Well, I thought that was the greatest psychological move known to man. He wanted me to get down on the mat with that
Sure
kid.
he did.
And that just wasn't going to happen. So that just confirmed for me I need to take him down and let up. But anyway, fortunately for me, perhaps, the kid from Maury, who lost him a couple times, beat him in the semifinals in the state tournament, and then I beat the kid from Maury.
So you didn't have to wrestle
I didn't see him again.
Right.
I didn't see him again.
Okay, so now let's jump ahead to William & Mary. Talk a little bit about that experience.
Well, it was a wonderful experience. The coaches there, Dick Besnier, was just a grand guy, a dear friend of mine today. He's retired up there now. And it was a bit of a change at first because going from, say, 103 pounds, which I was a big 103-pounder. I think I mentioned earlier I was about 117 pounds for the season started and had a lot of weight to lose. But jumping from there to 118 was a fairly big jump, and I was about 118 pounds that year. But the next year, I'd grown again a bit. I grew rather late in life, and was fortunate enough to start the better part of the season and did reasonably well in the conference. But I'd gained up to about 155 pounds, so I had to go from 155 down to 118. So it's there's a lot of discipline involved in that sport, and I'd like to think a lot of that, if done correctly, carries over to the law practice, the things we do today, and everyday life as a practical matter.
Right. Now, as you're working on your degree, now let's go back. While you were in William & Mary, you did pretty well in the conference.
Well, it came in third that sophomore year, which was okay. Back then, I think East Carolina and William & Mary were the best 2 teams in the conference. I'm not so sure third was doing wonderfully, but it did okay as a practical matter.
Right. And then later on, you did better than that? Or you had some guys in that team that end up with as All-Americans, which says a lot for William & Mary's program.
Yeah, a dear friend of mine named Mark Belknap had come in 5th in the nation his junior year and 3rd his senior year. And Mark was one of the reasons why I didn't see quite as much wrestling after that, because as I grew, I was more around his weight class, and another kid that we had there was quite good, who's now a lawyer down in Florida named Jimmy Hicks, who was an honorable mention All-American. So yeah, we had some good guys on that team, and another dear friend of mine, a roommate, has been the wrestling coach at VMI for the last 20 years. His name is John Trudgeon. They're all very, very good people and very good wrestlers.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about, I want to go back to when you were in 10th grade, and you started doing things which was very unusual for a 10th grader, and that's working for it wasn't the Daily Press you worked for the afternoon paper, which was the Times-Herald.
That's correct. Well, back then, I think going to a new school like Bethel was very fortunate for me. Bethel was a new school. I was the sports editor of the newspaper at that time, and might not have had that opportunity as a sophomore had we had seniors. We didn't have any seniors in the school first year there. As a result of that, I was fortunate enough to get a job with the afternoon paper. The gentleman named Nick Mayo hired me. I remember him. And worked there outside of wrestling season for the next several years, including college, because William & Mary wasn't that far away. Right. So outside of wrestling season, I worked there the 3 years of high school, 4 years of college, and then worked 3 years full-time after college before I started law school. And other than the first year of law school, worked there the last 2 years of law school. Wow. So many folks thought I'd been there 13 years full-time. It actually only been 3. Yeah,
but you were off and on for 17 years or whatever, a long time. But because I had Lynn Burke in here, and he was telling me, and he mentioned you, that you 2 guys rode up to some sort of sporting event, and he says, good friends, but he says, we still were in competition. And I didn't realize that because I thought, well, the papers work together, but that's not true, is it?
No, when you're dealing with a morning and an afternoon scenario, you have to create some competition to get the story first. A newspaper reporter always wants to get the story first. So one of the big things that we, as what we call prep writers, were always competing to try to find out which kids were going to which college and who could get it first. it was always a fun thing, but it was a competitive thing.
Right. What made you decide to go to law school? Was there anything in particular, or was it just something that you had been leaning towards?
I had pretty much always intended to go to law school since probably my sophomore year in college, but I'd also intended to work at the paper about 3 years. I think, again, it comes back to the sport, a question of creating the discipline and figuring out, okay, what do I want to do when, and plan for it.
Right. You must have a real soft spot in your heart for William & Mary.
I do. I do. It created a lot of opportunities for me, and it's always been a great place to go back to.
Right.
I know everybody thinks in terms of going away to school, and that was a way of sorts, but it was also nice to be able to come home if you needed to.
Right, 'cause we're not that far away. Talk a little bit about the Lifeline. Now, this was well, you tell me what it was.
Well, at one point I was doing a little bit of sports agency work, and there was a young man named Ron Spruill who had been a two-time All-ACC guard at the University of North Carolina, who also was a Bethel graduate and also a wrestler at Bethel High School. So we had ties going way back. His wife, he had recently married. His wife and my wife decided they wanted to start an aerobic studio, and from that blossomed a couple of health clubs that we operated for a number of years. Eventually, they went their separate ways, and they were no longer involved, but I guess we were in that business for about 10 years. Yeah,
because I enjoyed it. That's where I worked out. We really enjoyed it. Talk a little bit about the sports agents. Do you still do some of that?
No. I candidly found it to be a pretty difficult field to break into, and that, coupled with attempting to practice at the same time, proved to be a little bit too much. So now and again, I'll help some local folks if they ask me to with respect to various issues, but I'm not technically involved in that these days.
Okay. We'll wrap this up, but I want you to take what you learned through being a student athlete and how it helped you in your career.
Well, I think sports in general, wrestling in particular, but sports in general, Bob, is a great source of discipline. You know, it can also be a great source of teamwork. But in wrestling, especially those folks that trying to lose body fat, and maybe losing weight's the wrong term because you're really just trying to get your body in as good a shape as you can be in. Right. I don't want folks to get the wrong idea. You can go about it the wrong way. You can crash diet. You can lose too much weight. But if you do it the right way, the notion is to get your body fat down so that you can compete better. Right. And that requires you to monitor what you eat on a regular basis. That requires discipline. Right. And that is something that carries over into all walks of life. And it's a big help to me if I've got a heavy caseload and I'm trying to prepare and remain disciplined as to how much time to allot to this case this week, the next case next week, plan my time accordingly, and try to encourage the people that work with me and for me to do the same. Yeah,
you don't want to burn out.
You don't want to burn out, but you want to give every client the opportunity that they desire to have justice.
Right. Well, appreciate you coming in.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to LFC and Sports Time. I want to thank my special guest, Steve Forbes. I'm Bob Hintz. Until next time.